Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Milky-WHAT podcast, where you can just listen to me geek out about the wonders of space. As few as you may all be, I'm so glad that you've come back for the first official episode of the podcast. The introduction to the channel had a larger reach than I thought it would. Since this podcast is relatively new, I didn't expect anyone other than my friends to listen to my first video, but there are some of you out there who are genuinely interested in this project of mine, so thanks for that. In this episode, we'll be discussing the difference between astronomy and astrology. I'm so excited to talk about this because I know that almost everyone is familiar with astrology, and I feel that it's something all of you could relate to. Let's start with both definitions. Astronomy is defined as a science that studies everything outside of the Earth's atmosphere, like planets, stars, asteroids, galaxies, and the properties and relationships of those celestial bodies. Astronomers base their studies on research and observation. Now, this is very important because unlike astronomy, astrology is not a science. Instead, it is the belief that the positioning of the stars and planets have a direct correlation with our behavior on Earth. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, especially those who have their birth chart memorized from back to back and judge others based on your compatibility, but astrology is not more accurate than astronomy. It's almost like comparing apples and oranges, you know? They're both kind of in the same group, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. However, if that's the case, then why are so many of us drawn to it? In order to answer this question, we have to look a little bit at the history of how both of these concepts became ingrained in society. So, before physics and the scientific method played a role in the study of not just celestial bodies, but of the physical laws on Earth, people regarded astrology as an actual scientific process. Some of you may be asking yourselves, why would anyone ever base their life off of some dots in the sky? But you have to consider how life was for people in the early civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. Back then, the only light available for people other than the sun, and maybe fire, was the night sky. And I can only imagine how people flipped out once they noticed that certain groups of stars or constellations moved around them. Keep in mind that earlier astrology was pre-Copernican, meaning that it was based on the geocentric theory rather than the heliocentric theory that Nicholas Copernicus developed in 1508 circa. So, once these people saw the patterns in the sky, they assigned them meaning. Up until then, it was the only way they could apply some sort of otherworldly reasoning to their lives. It wasn't until Isaac Newton established the previously researched laws of physics in the 1600s that astrology evolved into more of a pseudoscience and a spiritual way to read the stars. But after the laws of physics were funneled into not just mainstream society, but teaching and actual observational research, astrology was rejected, completely by scientists. However, those who still sought spiritual meaning in the stars saw a resurgence in astrology after the mid-20th century with astrological psychology. This more humanistic view of astrology focused more on self-improvement rather than the hierarchical relationship between celestial events and terrestrial behavior in nature. Today in Western society, astrology is seen as a lighthearted way of learning about yourself, or better said, what you could be. Obviously, some tend to take this concept a little too seriously, whether it's by limiting themselves or setting really high expectations based on something as trivial as their sign. But thanks to social media and many apps dedicated to horoscopes, it's become more of a niche activity rather than a commonly practiced way of life. That's for Western culture though. Currently, in many Eastern cultures, astrology plays a big role in traditional events like religion, marriage, and other relationships. One of the best examples of this is the use of Vedic astrologies in India's Hindu culture. It's a sharp but interesting contrast to how society perceives astrology when compared to the US, for example. So, with all this in mind, you can start seeing the influences which led astrology to evolve throughout history and reach us in the way that it does now. For my life experiences, I can't even imagine going about my day based on my horoscope or birth chart. It's way too much. I know I'm a Virgo, but I'm also Aries rising. I don't know. Nevertheless, I still look at my sign first whenever I see a horoscope online. And astrology is something that will never cease to catch my eye. I mean, it caters to my psyche and my personality, so why wouldn't I look at it? I wish I could have insight into what I'm supposed to be doing with my life and what I'll do in the future, but I guess that's only a luxury for the most active of fanatics and natives to the language of astrology, you could say. Even though astrology is not a science, I don't think it should be discounted completely. I mean, it did lead the way to astronomy, or at least us thinking about the stars, and I still think it has some things we could take from it. Astrology caters to our imagination more so than it does to any academic or research field. What are you most likely to look at? A study on the patterns of constellations and galaxies, or your horoscope for the day? And it does get you thinking about how astrologers worked around astrological maps and charts, which could be a gateway into astronomy. I know that when I was gifted a Smithsonian encyclopedia about the universe, I first flipped to the pages of the Virgo constellation. And no, it wasn't my horoscope for the day. It was simply a map of where the constellation lied in the night sky. But it was interesting to read about its properties. Did you know that it's actually the largest of the zodiac constellations and the second largest, overall? Anyways, although astrology is one of the ways the public is introduced into the concept of the study of space, it's just for entertainment, really. The true magic lies in astronomy and the related field of astrophysics. Like I mentioned in my previous video, astronomy takes physics and chemistry as well as a bunch of other different sciences and applies them into the environment of space. But I didn't make the distinction between astronomy and astrophysics. Really, there is no distinction other than the fact that both try to answer different questions. In astronomy, we try to identify all the celestial objects, while in astrophysics, we try to explain how those objects work. But both subjects overlap, and you could answer both questions in any of the two fields depending on what you're looking for and how you want to present it. Yeah, so there you have it. Do whatever you want with this information, and I hope it was at least a little bit interesting. Thank you for tuning in until the end of the episode, and please feel free to comment down below on whatever it is that you want me to talk about next. I really enjoy researching these topics, so yeah, make sure to share this with everyone you know to see if they know the difference between astronomy and astrology. Until later.